Hi, I'm Jerry Bowyer. Thank you for joining us for Meeting of Minds podcast. Our guest today is Rick Graber. He's the CEO of the Lined and Harry Bradley Foundation. He's also the chairman of the Philanthropy Roundtable. We're going to talk about a lot of things, Lord willing, but one thing that really caught my eye was an article that he did recently for RealClearMarkets. Philanthropic wokeism undermines free market principles. Rick, first of all, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thanks very much, Jerry. Great to be with you.
And thank you for writing this article. I think that you made a point, at least in your interview with Rob Bluey, which is that conservatives are way behind in terms of engagement with the boardrooms. We've been fighting in politics, maybe in culture to some degree. But in essence, it looks like the secular utopian left, now summed up as woke, has essentially had its way in the boardroom almost entirely unimposed, except for a guy named Justin Danhoff. Like one guy showing up,
great work.
199 lefties and Justin at a meeting, and that we've been sort of behind on this. We've got some catching up to do.
Oh, we do. Jerry, I'm a corporate lawyer by training, and I had always been told and taught that the responsibility of management of a corporation and the responsibility of a board was to the shareholders and only the shareholders. And their job was to manage a really good company that made money and produced results for the shareholders. And that has just drifted in very troubling ways in recent years. And maybe some would argue that this has been going on for a long time. But it seems to me a big distraction for boards and CEOs and senior level managers to have multiple stakeholders, and that's what's happening. And even some institutions that have been around for a lot of years and have been friendly towards our way of thinking on this, and Milton Friedman's way of thinking on this. Places like the United States Chamber of Commerce, places like the Business Roundtable out of Washington, D.C., are all buying into this multiple stakeholder theory that I think can undermine the effectiveness of businesses in this country. I think it can produce some negative results for people that hold pension funds, for instance. And it's something that we've got to fight back on. And you're right, we're way behind. And Justin has been a lone warrior on this. There are others now who understand that this is a problem. Hopefully it's not too late to the table, but we've got a lot of work to do, a lot of work. And frankly, I don't need a CEO to tell me how to think or how to live my life.
Right.
And that's what's going on.
We send out something to all of the holdings. I'm involved with money management. That's my day job. But I've been attending annual meetings like crazy this year. And we sent something out to all of our holdings, which is 313 companies that we have substantial stakes in, that we have contact information for. There's 330 companies, so some of them are uncontactable. What does that tell you about their orientation? And basically put together a set of principles. And to sum it up, it is that American corporations are the arm, that this is going back to Plato or Corinthians, that a society is also like a body and there's different organs that have different functions. You're the arm that turns the dynamo, not the mouth that preaches to the rest of us. And it's interesting to see the reaction from different companies to that. Some didn't want to hear it. Some were like, finally, we're hearing from shareholders who want us to do our day job and are trying to pull us off into something else. But I'm curious, when you were at Honeywell, how much of this was incoming at you back then? Because it's at high peak now, but maybe it wasn't so strong then. Were you starting to see it?
Oh, there was some of that. You may be familiar with the ALEC organization, which is an association of primarily of state legislators that tends to be conservative. There was always an attack on ALEC during my days at Honeywell. Always went to the CEO, always ended up on my desk. I was responsible for global government relations for Honeywell, and we were able to fight it off. So it was beginning to happen, but I don't think nearly as intense as it is now. You see what Delta Airlines did with the Georgia voting election law. You saw what Major League Baseball did, what Coca-Cola did. None of that, I don't think, would have happened during my days at Honeywell. It wasn't that extreme. And those are three good examples of CEOs who have just gone totally off the rails.
It's interesting. I'm seeing a lot of things on the ballot on the proxies that are about transparency regarding lobbying dollars and contributions to trade associations and advocacy organizations. And it is a transparent attempt to go after ALEC or the Competitive Enterprise Institute. It's basically, you said something vaguely green, CEO. Now we're going to make you reveal that you gave money to ALEC, which is a climate denier, or CEI, climate denier, or vote suppressor. And then we're going to publicly embarrass you about it to defund the right. And it's interesting, management is fighting these things, but they kind of let the camel's nose in the tent when they made statements about shareholder capitalism. I mean, essentially, they made kind of gestures and they said some things that they thought would cause the left-wing activists to go away. And the activists come back and say, oh, that's just a promise that you made. Now, that's like a blank check that you wrote for us to come back to you over and over and over again and force you to live up to that, or we publicly embarrass you and browbeat you into it.
No, you're exactly right. It's I mean, the instinct, I think, of many in corporations, you're right, is to just make it go away. What little can we do to kind of get through this little fire that we have to put out, at least until next year? And I think that's kind of been the mentality. It's particularly true, of course, in publicly traded corporations. Right. I think it is less true in privately held businesses where you don't have the huge shareholder base or the institutional investors. And maybe that's a place that free market proponents such as us should be turning to for a louder voice coming out of the business community.
You're talking about private equity, or
privately held businesses,
as opposed to public.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So, but why not public? I mean, we've barely shown up and we've lost. We've forfeited the game. Why not show up?
Well, I don't think we should give up.
Okay, got it.
Right. Absolutely. I'm not saying give up, but I'm saying if we want some additional voices to be heard on this topic, that some of the large privately held businesses, most businesses in this country are privately held, and most people believe in free markets and believe what is possible in this country.
I think one of the problems with some of these CEOs, especially the large tech companies, is they're publicly traded, but they think like they're still privately owned. They still, still think of Starbucks or Apple or whatever as sort of like a privately held corporation that can do whatever it wants politically, rather than be accountable to shareholders.
Yes. And on the shareholder questions, you're right, that we all see on all the proxy statements, management suggests voting no, but how strongly do they do that? How much of a public campaign do they conduct on those kinds of things? Not very much. Again, it's get rid of the problem and hope it goes away at least until next year.
And a lot of times they said yes in a negotiation, and therefore it never appeared on the proxy. They surrendered before the vote. What will it take for you to get this off of the proxy? And so, as you sow, or some other group says, "We'll just do this, this, and this, and promise it, and then we'll withdraw the proxy." So the fact that there wasn't a vote means they won before the vote, which is pretty discouraging.
You're absolutely right.
You're
absolutely right.
Yeah. Let me make another observation. You mentioned large publicly traded. What I'm finding is small and mid, that we can make a lot more headway there.
I agree.
I agree. They tend to be Midwestern or Southern. They're not as big. They haven't been captured yet, and they resent this pressure. So that might be one of the zones. Like I fought. We owned Apple, and I talked to them, but I didn't expect to win. But if you talk to a Midwestern lumber company, you can actually expect to influence the debate with smaller mid-cap and kind of almost inoculate them to say, when the utopians knock on your door, understand that the silent majority is with you. Don't give in.
Yes, absolutely. Our founders would be spinning. The founders of our foundation, two brothers from Milwaukee, Lynd and Harry Bradley, who created an amazing company in Milwaukee called the Allen Bradley Company. And they believe so dearly in free markets and limited government, and get government out of the way and let me try, and I might fail, but if I keep working at this, I'm going to succeed. And that's exactly what they did. And you're right. I think most people in business think that way, and most people are not these big tech guys that are doing what they're doing to us.
So why is it that the money of Henry Ford, David Rockefeller, Andrew Mellon, to use a local example, I'm here in Western Pennsylvania, that is essentially fighting against everything that those men believed in? So that's part one. And why is it that, say, the money that the Bradley brothers generated is not? And I can also mention Scaife. There's other. They haven't all been professionalized into leftism. So what's the difference? Why does it happen sometimes and not others? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I mean, it's a serious question of donor intent. I doubt if Henry Ford would approve of what's going on with the Ford Foundation these days. It really does come down to the governance of a foundation. Bradley, in theory, is a foundation forever, perpetual. Right. Bradley has stayed true to its mission for its 36 years of existence. And it's because our board of directors takes succession very, very seriously. And every single time that there's a vacancy, and it doesn't happen often, but when it does, all 11 directors are engaged to make sure that whoever is taking that vacant seat is aligned with what the brothers would have wanted had they still been at the table.
So there's a focus on philosophical succession.
Absolutely.
And board oversight.
Absolutely. I mean, we're stewards of this incredible gift that the Bradley brothers created through the creation of the Allen Bradley Company. And it is our job. It's my job. It's every staff member here at Bradley's job. It's every director's job to make sure that we're doing our very best to do what they would have done were they still with us. And they've been gone a long time.
What does St. Paul say to the Corinthians? First of all, it is required of stewards that they be found faithful.
Yes.
And it seems to me that...
And,
go ahead.
And you're right. Some foundations have stayed true. Sadly, many, maybe even most, have not.
Just going back in my own life, a long time ago, I was running a think tank, so I was dealing with foundations. And mostly with the Scaife foundations, but with some others.
Sure.
But we were up against some of the establishment foundations on the other side of an issue. So there were conversations. And what I noticed is some of the smaller foundations, like Second Generation, I was watching this happen in real time. I won't mention names. I don't want to call people out. But right. Somebody is a capitalist in the free market and they make a lot of money. They've got a big pile, and then the son and the daughter, or the son and the daughter, or whoever, they take over. And what they would do is they would look at the big foundations, the Mellons, whatever, and they would ask them, who should we hire to be our executive director? They would take staffing cues from the big guys. And I remember talking to them about it and saying, well, would your father agree with the philosophy of this person? And they'd always say, no, he wouldn't. Well, how about you? In many cases, they didn't. But they said, well, we have to professionalize the staffing. That's the sell. We're going to professionalize it, which means there's a kind of a philanthropic deep state almost. There's a profession of running foundations. And so it's a quest for status rather than philosophical succession. And then they essentially go against the wishes of the donors, like sometimes within 10, 15 years of the death of the donor.
Right. You mentioned the Philanthropy Roundtable. That's why the Roundtable was created in the first place, as a counter to the Council on Foundations, which is a trade association essentially of left-leaning foundations, whereas the Roundtable tends to be the more conservative foundations. And there is, there's some wonderful organizations on the center right that deal with recruiting and placement of like-minded staff. So there are resources out there to get the right people. We use them, and again, I, as CEO of the Bradley Foundation, I go through the same vetting process with staff that our board does when they replace themselves on the board, and that's how it has to be. It has to be like that throughout the organization, and we want every single person in our organization, regardless of their position, to believe in what we're doing.
So it sounds like at some point the center-right coalition, probably through the Roundtable, created an alternate feeder system.
Yes, I think that's true.
For foundations and professionals, for
Yes.
foundations, right?
Yes, yes.
Yeah.
And the Bradley Foundation years ago, long before my time here, was very involved in that, as was the Olin Foundation and some others.
Olin Foundation, yes, exactly. So, one of my dreams here is, okay, that's great. There's a feeder system for that. We need an alternate feeder system for members of boards of directors of publicly traded companies. Even if we wanted to elect the right people, they're not on the ballot. They're not trained. There isn't any system. I mean, there are feeder systems, but by the time you're on the list of this person is, sort of board ready, they've been completely ideologically indoctrinated.
Yes, yes. And some of I just talked about the recruiting firms that are out there in foundation world and not-for-profit world. Right. We need some more of those recruiting firms at the board level.
Yeah, for publicly traded companies. Yeah,
absolutely.
Absolutely. So put that on your to-do list, will you? I'm sure it's small enough.
Got it.
I mean, I'm out there. Like Justin's been going to these meetings. Like I'm the second guy now at these meetings. It's a big job, but
sure it is.
But here's the thing: if you have 200 people from one point of view and one person shows up from the other point of view, that is not a 0.5% shift in the rhetoric. That's like a 20% shift in the rhetoric. And 2 people show up and 3 people, that power dynamic changes dramatically, because if you go from being not a debate to being a debate, you've made a big change.
Absolutely. And I'm very familiar with Justin's work, and I know single-handedly he has accomplished a lot.
Yes.
In a relatively short period of time, but it's tough work, and you're out there by yourself. So thank you, Jerry, for what you're doing.
Yeah, well, he's helped. I think you've supported him, so indirectly you've been helping us in the financial, rather than nonprofit think tank side. He's been a great resource to us. Hey, I want to talk a little bit about this New Yorker piece, which I read it, and it read to me like a hatchet job of Paul Bunyan-esque proportions. But I'd like to get your take. I mean, essentially what it seems like they did to me is they said, here's a bunch of crazy things that QAnon people said last year. And then they kind of got the Bradley Foundation sort of mentioned in and around that group. But if you read way down to the end and you read the fine print, it turns out that the Bradley Foundation's election efforts precede these groups, aren't funding these crazy groups, and aren't involved with these crazy groups. You just noticed that the left was trying to game election laws, and you pushed against that without the conspiracy theories and the riots and all the rest of it. It seemed like they almost wanted to just get you named in the article, even to the point where the title was "Big Money Supports This," even though when I read the article, I couldn't find any way that your big money was supporting this sort of thing.
No, it was a terribly misleading, inaccurate article by Jane Meyer, which is unfortunate. Really, what the Bradley Foundation has done and is doing is fund organizations that are trying to strengthen our election process. This is a fundamental institution in the United States of America, and it's really important that people have faith and trust in that institution. And after last year, when the way we elect people in this country changed so dramatically, in part because of COVID, but you have way more mail-in ballots and absentee ballots than ever before by a significant multiple. You've got this concept of ballot harvesting, where people are collecting ballots. Here in Wisconsin, it was happening in parks in the city of Madison. You've got Mark Zuckerberg dumping hundreds of millions of dollars into governments around the country, primarily in targeted Democrat strongholds in an effort to turn out the vote. It is very, very fair to be looking at this and to asking questions about it and to suggesting ways to strengthen that institution. So that's what the Bradley Foundation is doing. She threw out numbers about how much we had funded in this effort. In 2020, we spent $500,000, which is a significant amount of money, but it's far short of the $18 million that she quotes.
You've given out roughly $1 billion in grants, right?
Over time, since 1985.
Okay. Out of that $1 billion, roughly how much has gone to election reform issues?
Oh my goodness, less than 1%.
Right. I kind of eyeballed your giving patterns, and that's what it seemed like to me to be something close to a rounding error.
And I'm not going to apologize for 1 minute. I'm proud of the work that our grantees are doing in this area, and will continue to do in this area. Groups like the Public Interest Legal Foundation, Heritage, and several others, they're doing great work. And what they're trying to do is make this country stronger, and to prop up an institution that people don't have as much faith in. Even Democrats, only 55% of Democrats in a recent poll said that they fully trusted the election process. There's a lot of work to be done here, and this is a fair conversation. And unfortunately, in today's world, when you even raise questions, you're racist, or you're a white supremacist, or you're trying to suppress the vote, or things of that sort. And that's not helpful, and it's not good for the country.
Yeah, and I was a talk show host in the election of 2000 and the election of 2004. And let me tell you, the left was perfectly willing to question election results, and perfectly willing to push conspiracy theories about Diebold, being owned by this one that was, they were doing their own like Beautiful Mind yarn connections all over the place. So, everyone has a conspiracy wing. But they certainly, they didn't mind undermining election confidence then, did they?
No, Hillary Clinton certainly spewed that. And as far as I know, Stacey Abrams hasn't conceded her governor's race in Georgia yet.
All right, so with the New Yorker piece, you read that and you say, maybe I should slow down a little bit, or stick to it, or maybe hit the gas pedal a little more.
Oh no. Well, one thing about Bradley is we keep doing what we're doing, and we're not going to stop. And Jane Mayer's article is not going to deter us in any way whatsoever. We're going to keep doing what we think is best for this country to preserve and protect the institutions of this country that are so important to all of our freedoms.
One of the things that you are doing, you're about to do, although as of the time of the airing, you might have just done it, is the Bradley Prize. I see Amity Shlaes is going to get one. I'm a big fan of Amity.
Outstanding author.
Yeah, she really is. So why? What has Amity Shlaes done to merit the prestigious Bradley Prize?
It's a great, fun process. The Bradley Prizes were created to be a celebration of the accomplishments of conservatives across the country. And every year we go through a very rigorous process. We have a nominating committee that submits about 200 nominations or more across the country, and then a selection committee, vets those nominations, and then ultimately makes a recommendation to the Bradley Board of Directors. And it culminates in a wonderful ceremony in Washington, D.C. at the National Building Museum that celebrates accomplishments and celebrates freedom. And it's great fun. And this year's winners are a terrific class of winners. You mentioned Amity. She'll be great. Roger Ream, who runs the Fund for American Studies, a great organization that deals with students, with young people, and teaching principles of free markets and limited government, and all the principles that we hold dear. He's been in this game for a long time, and is very, very well deserving of this award. And then Molly Hemingway is the third winner this year. And Molly is well known. She's a terrific, fearless journalist, and is doing great work. And the whole event is hosted by Kim Strassel, who's outstanding in her own right.
So there's
a former Bradley Prize winner.
I didn't know that. So there's a kind of there's a journalistic tilt here, because
depends on the year.
Yeah, I see. Got it.
Depends on the year. Some years yes, some years no.
All right.
It just depends on how the process plays out, and I never know when the process begins how it's going to end. There are twists and turns and discussions, and it's a hard decision, but it's a very fun process. And when 1 year's done, we go on to the next and do it again.
Well, when Amity was about to publish the book about the Great Society, she sent me mock-ups, and I didn't do an interview at that time, and I kicked myself. It's like, now I've got a news hook again with the Bradley Prize, so I'm just going to put a star here.
Good.
Good.
We'll
because, the book is just in time, because it seems to me like we're heading into a 1970s type economic environment, which is preceded by essentially the bad economics of the late 1960s. So I think she's timely again.
Well, I absolutely agree. I mean, Johnson's Great Society has proven not to work. And it's actually one of the things that the Bradley Foundation believes in so firmly, the Bradley brothers believed in, that the best way to solve problems in our society is through people. It's not more government programs. I look at our own community here in Milwaukee, the best organizations that are helping people deal with problems of addiction or trying to get a good education, K through 12, are not government programs. It's people that are committed to their cause, that work tirelessly, anonymously, that are truly making a difference in people's lives. And those are the groups that we fund and support.
That's great. I would also make almost a regional observation, which is that I've noticed that a lot of the great solutions don't come from the big cities. I'm saying not even from conservatives in Washington or New York, but a lot of it is just coming from, I'm thinking about some of the models that, like in Indianapolis or Wisconsin, that you have enough leeway there to create new models, see if they work, prove them out, and then nationalize it, take it up to the top, and then it can be distributed to the rest of the country.
Right.
So, sometimes I even get the
school choice started in Milwaukee.
Yes, exactly.
And we're 30 years into that experiment, and still have a whole lot more to do. But today,
and you spearheaded that. I mean, right?
Bradley was in the middle of that,
yeah.
Absolutely, and many others, including Governor Thompson at the time, Tommy Thompson.
Yeah.
And as I said, others. But that process is far from over. But to the point, it's taken 30 years, and now 40% of the kids in the city of Milwaukee do not go to a traditional public school. So there's an incredible infrastructure that is built here that I hope is ready to take another giant leap forward with all that has gone on in the last year with the way that public schools have conducted themselves here and around the country.
Yes. This is a moment for school. There has never been a greater moment for school choice in my lifetime.
I believe you're right.
Yeah,
I believe you're right.
And just another observation: a lot of conservatism is about taking a Washington process legislation and moving it 2 degrees, another 2 degrees. Oh no, it comes back. Whereas a workable model, no matter how small, is far more influence in the long run than just moving that Maginot line back a couple of meters in one direction in Washington, because that can go viral.
Yes.
All right, quick, go ahead.
I'm just saying, that's why we have our system of federalism. Great stuff can happen and does happen at the local level, and more often starts at the local level and the state level before Washington mucks it up.
But it doesn't work without local policy and philanthropic entrepreneurs.
Absolutely.
There's the potential to create local models under federalism, but somebody actually has to create them.
Yes.
Right. And that's what you help fund. All right. Instead of local models, national models, you were the ambassador to the Czech Republic, I think under W. Then I think Obama came along and said, thank you for your service.
Well, I got fired on January 20th. year.
You were quick. I mean, that's early. Apparently you were on some kind of short list.
I was gone by noon.
So I'm very intrigued by the whole former Warsaw Pact, Eastern European emerging. I'm intrigued as an investor, but also as an observer. So can you kind of give, Tucker went to Hungary recently, and a lot of the Twitter sphere went kind of nutso over that. Can I just have your observation? Because there's a general tendency for Western Europe to say Eastern Europe is a whole bunch of fascists and anti-Semites, and there's nothing good there. And that seems to me to be maybe a little unfair. So you serve there. I'd like a more balanced analysis of that region.
Well, it was a wonderful experience for me and for our family. And the Czechs would call themselves Central Europeans, not Eastern Europeans.
Fair enough.
They're fairly sensitive about that. But it's a small country of 10 million people. When you're there for almost 3 years, you get a very good sense of the country. And to me, it was both in talking to people like Václav Havel, who was still alive at that time at very senior levels, but just as importantly, talking to village mayors and the person that drove my car when I was there, their love for what they saw in America, their appreciation for freedom. They remember the days, many in that society, when that country was not free, when they were part of the Soviet bloc, and they longed for the opportunity for a life that was different than that. And we just take this for granted, and we shouldn't take it for granted. And it really hit home with me the importance of our freedoms and the importance of the United States and the role that the United States plays in the world. People look to America in countries like the Czech Republic and Poland and Slovakia and surrounding countries there. So the United States has an important role. And while I worry a little bit about younger generations in those countries because they don't remember those days, I would be very upbeat about the prospects in countries like that. Yes, they have steps forward and they have steps back, but democracies are messy. And I would say that the Czech Republic, based on my experience, is a solid democracy. There are problems, but there always will be.
Well, and they are somewhat a different civilization from American civilization, right? I mean, there's a kind of Eastern Orthodox culture versus a Western, maybe it has something to do with the Filioque clause in the Nicene Creed. I don't know what it is, but they do have more unitary societies rather than individualistic. But then again, there's lots of different ways to govern nations.
Part of history, yes.
Right. So
I think many recoil at the notion of the European Union, where you have sort of a nameless, faceless bureaucracy in Brussels dictating to them what they can and can't do. And I think that bothers a lot of people in countries like the Czech Republic, probably more so than in places like France. It's interesting, and I think it's for historic reasons that they feel that way.
And godless. I mean, I think that's a real part of these Central and Eastern European identities.
No question in the Czech Republic.
Yeah, right.
I mean, religion just does not play a central role in most people's lives.
Interesting. Okay, so the last question, unless there's something you want to add, the Philanthropy Roundtable Center, right, donors, there have been attempts, both legal and illegal, to essentially expose donor lists, which we all know is really a false face for exposing conservative donor lists. You were hacked, but there have also been attempts legally, which so far the courts have been swatting down, for, say, a state attorney general to release donor lists so that people can show up at your door and say, you're an election denier or a COVID, whatever they're trying to smear you with. It seems to me that if these donor lists get released to the public, then the IRS and similar state-level organizations essentially become surveillance. Speaking of, Central Europe, Eastern European, Stasi, they become almost surveillance agencies for the left, right?
I mean, the donor privacy issue is a massive issue, the one you talk. There's also an effort underway by certain people in Washington to revise the rules on donor advised funds and foundations, all in an effort, I think, to deter funding, some of it from the right. And I guess the Roundtable's position, and the Roundtable has wonderful leadership in Elise Westhoff and her team that are resisting this at every turn. And the reasons are really very sound. This is the most generous country on earth. And actually that became very clear to me living overseas for the years that we did, that it is just not part of the DNA of people in other countries to give up time and resources the way we do in this country. It's part of who we are. We give as much or more as almost any country in the world. Why are we messing with this? Why do we have to regulate and change and fix something that doesn't need fixing? People were concerned after COVID that giving would go down. In fact, it went up dramatically. That's the American people. So, specifically on the donor privacy issue, I think there are grave concerns that people are afraid that if some of this stuff becomes public, that they're going to get harassed. And you know what will happen then? They just won't give the money.
Right. And that's the idea. Because you ask why, let me attempt an answer. Because even a tiny minority of philanthropic dollars, of foundation dollars going to the center right, if 10% of it, and that's just my guess, that 10% of foundation dollars are going to our causes, just like Justin showing up at a meeting of 200, that 10% punches above its weight, and it's a threat. And so the spigot has to be shut off, and they'll do it by intimidation.
Yes.
Because they can't have a debate, because they can't win a debate.
Right. We've got to resist it at every turn. And again, this is one of the core institutions of this country. It's part of our culture.
Yes.
And it's something that we have to desperately fight to preserve because it's great. And it is great in what it can accomplish and has accomplished.
And the Bradley Foundation has been in the middle of that. Before I let you go, I've kept you a little longer than you agreed to, but is there anything else that you wanted to touch base on? At the end of every interview, I say, hey, is there something I should have asked you or something you wanted to talk about that I just didn't get to give you a chance to sign off on something that you want to say?
I'd say, Jerry, I think we covered just about everything. I think it's great. I enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. So I'll just sign off with thank you so much for the work of the Bradley Foundation, and thank you for bringing attention to this issue of shareholder engagement. Conservatives have been slow, but we're pretty good at catching up once we become aware of a problem, and I think we're going to catch up pretty quickly.
Let's do it together.
And thank you all to listening to us here at Meeting of Minds podcast. I'm Jerry Bowyer signing off.